If we follow Max Weber's idea that modernity is marked by the disenchantment of the world, then we can see how the Protestant Reformation plays a crucial role in this disenchantment by stripping away certain forms of spiritual understandings of the sacred, particularly how the medieval mind viewed itself and understood its place within the world. However, Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale can be seen as performing a re-enchantment of the world, particularly through its movement from loss and winter and suspicion to this place of wonder, springtime, and summer, and even resurrection. So we've been thinking a lot about enchantment in this course so far, but I'd like to introduce the idea of re-enchantment, which is slightly different. Because now we're entering into the part of the syllabus where we're definitely in the early modern period. Spenser was there, more of a Renaissance work, his the Faerie Queene. But it's around that area where things begin to change, where modernity is being brought to light, being birthed. So I want us to consider re-enchantment because it seems to me that literature from this point on, after the Renaissance, after the Protestant Reformation, literature is participating in a recovery of something that it's lost. And we saw this in Spenser, where we saw the great Protestant epic, the Faerie Queene, making Protestantism really enchanting, and he's trying to go back and recapture this archaic sense. That's why he's using the archaic addiction. He's resurrecting the romance genre. But I think that The Winter's Tale is primarily one of re-enchantment because Protestantism didn't just declare war on Roman Catholicism, it also was against many nature rites and seasonal rituals. And all of that makes brief appearances in this play. So, re-enchantment, of course, is a little bit different from enchantment. The act of re-enchanting performs this life-giving rejuvenation upon a world that has been disenchanted, and it labors to enact or perform its reversal. So it's a little different. Re-enchantment is like the April rain over the wastelands, the green sproutings on the carpet of winter white, the rattle of birch wands stirring in the wind, the morning star rising from the storm-washed quiet sea. This morning, which was here in Cambridge, one of the warmest of the year, it was the sound of the black-capped chickadee. It's this return of something, this reversal of winter into spring, and this play is the performance of that. The Winter's Tale is one of Shakespeare's late romances. We can call it a romance, we can call it a tragic comedy, but most of the late plays, the late comedies, have this fantastical element about them. And this is a play that defies strict generic classification, so it's difficult to say what exactly it is. It blends tragedy. The first three acts, basically a tragedy. Then that's reversed by the final two. It's also a romance in the sense that Spenser's is a romance. We saw that genre introduced with Malory. And it also has the elements of a pastoral drama, which was a Renaissance favorite, already pretty much out of style by the time this play is produced in 1610 or 1611. Its early reception was mixed. Critics didn't quite know what to make of it. In the following years, people debated. It didn't really have a genre. It was genre bending, its structure, and the fantastical elements were seen as flaws. The fantastical, the unbelievable ending is seen by some to be perfunctory, unimaginative, and just kind of a bow on top, a way to conclude things. But is it perfunctory? Is it unimaginative? And that's what the question is for us today. In this lecture, I want to show how the play subtly engages with its contemporaneous religious contexts and its pagan ritual past in really complex ways. The play reverses the Christian doctrine to arrive at, ultimately, a reversal or re-enchantment that is suggestively at once pagan and at once Roman Catholic, and possibly, depending on how you read the final scene, also Protestant in the sense of the Spenserian enchantment there. But I think it's doing too many things and in complex ways to read this as a neat allegory, as some scholars have done. This is not about the reversal of the Reformation. As we go on, I think you'll see why I'm making this comment. But how are these fantastical, what we might call enchanting, elements of the play working in Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale through this reenactment of enchantment, through re-enchantment? What is the contemporary disenchantment that the play acts against? And by considering this question in light of the early modern period in England, I hope to provide a better understanding of the play's magic elements and the surprising and mystical resolution at the end of the final act. So let's begin with Act 1. The tragedy and comic resolution revolve around this anxiety of interpretation, specifically touch. Touch is very important in this play, and it's something that worries Leontes considerably. Polixenes is the king of Bohemia. He's visiting his friends, King Leontes in Sicily, and his wife, Queen Hermione. But Polixenes is there for 9 months, and he's ready to go home, but Leontes doesn't want him to, so he sends his wife, Hermione, to plead that he stays. And she convinces him where Leontes couldn't. And Leontes begins to imagine that Polixenes and Hermione are actually having an affair. They're in love with each other. And we get this very difficult scene, some of the ravings of Leontes' mind. His anxiety is about Hermione's supposed infidelity. And this, I want to suggest, actually mirrors the problem of Book One of Spenser's The Faerie Queene, the moral and epistemological trial of perception. How can we trust what is seen? How do we interpret what is seen? And this is the problem with the visionary. Because sometimes what is seen is not what is good. Especially with Red Cross Knight when he encountered the false appearance of Una, which wasn't really Una. And in both cases, in this case with Leontes and the Red Cross Knight, the protagonist fails to distinguish from illusion, leading to a tragic and deeply consequential error. But this is that moment where he sees them from afar, maybe the corner of the room, making contact. Too hot to mingle friendship far as mingling bloods. I have tremor cordis on me. My heart dances, but not for joy, not joy. This entertainment may a free face put on, derive a liberty from heartiness, from bounty, fertile bosom, and well become the agent. To may, I grant, but to be paddling palms and pinching fingers as now they are, and making practised smiles as in a looking glass, and then to sigh as 'twere the more to the dear. Oh, that is entertainment my bosom likes not, nor my brows. But notice how these anxieties are really haptic, and haptic means concerning touch, almost exclusively haptic, relating to touch and the misinterpretation of what we might call those haptic signs, the paddling palms, pinching fingers. The world is thrust into turmoil when Leontes suspects, quote, that Polixenes, quote, hath touched his queen forbiddenly. So Leontes orders Camillo to kill Polixenes. And everybody in the court knows that Leontes is off his off the rails. Nobody believes that Hermione um, is in love with Polixenes. So Camillo warns Polixenes, and the two leave together for Bohemia. Now, when Polixenes and Camillo flee, Leontes' suspicions are just further confirmed. This solidifies his own anxieties. He publicly accuses Hermione of adultery, imprisons her. Nobody but Leontes thinks that she's been unfaithful, so to convince his lords, the king sends two servants to the oracle. to get confirmation from the gods. And while those two servants are off consulting the oracle, meanwhile in prison, Hermione gives birth to a baby daughter. And Hermione's friend, Paulina, who's Camillo's wife, takes the daughter to the king, hoping that the sight of the baby will soften his heart. But it doesn't work. He grows angrier and he commands that it be hidden away. He orders, no, excuse me, Paulina's husband, Antigonus. Paulina marries Camillo in the end, but Camillo is not the husband of Paulina. It's Antigonus who does die after he gets rid of the child somewhere in the wild. So this is part of the problem, the crux of the play, like the Faerie Queene, Book One. This is a story about the problem of interpretation of appearances. And this was a huge problem that everybody in England had to deal with in the 16th century. The problem of interpretation. Everyone really had to come down on a side. Either you were Catholic or you were Protestant, and some people flopped back and forth depending on who was in charge. The Protestant Reformation was so obsessed with false images. We saw this last week when we were talking about the iconoclasm, where people were going into the churches and destroying statues. Archimago is also suggestive of that as a villain who embodies the deceptive visual. Hello, everyone. If you're enjoying this lecture and you'd like to join the live classrooms and the discussions, then you can sign up to study literature with me at Versed, an online community where readers study poetry and take classes together. It's inspired by the university lecture hall and discussion model, and this is where I host my live courses, my live lectures, book clubs, seminar discussions, and more, all with an open door policy. No pressure, no cold calls, and no snobbery. Just serious people who love literature in a friendly space. Every few months or so, we vote on our next courses and reading groups. So as a member, you can help us decide what we'll read next. And when you do join, you'll get access to the live discussions that are happening now, all the past courses, all the discussion rooms, the chat rooms, the special Q&A sessions that I sometimes host, and the office hours with me, where you can talk about your latest readings. You'll even find space to share some of your own poetry if you're a poet yourself, a place where you can workshop poetry with other poets who practice the craft. It's a great place to find community with other readers and other poets. So if you'd like to join us, check out the link below. And now, back to the lecture. And underlying this obsession is this fear of outward piety, this outward show, even of spiritual corruption. So the reformers frequently described the Catholic Church as deceptive, spiritually corrupt, portraying the Pope as an antichrist and the Mass as an empty spectacle. It's interesting. It's something very visual for them. It's a performance. And that's also why the Puritans did not like stage performances, because it was too liturgical. And often drama was associated with liturgical festivals, something I think is going to be important later in this lecture. So for figures like Martin Luther, the Reformers, John Calvin, they were really suspicious of the external ritual, the spectacle, that which is seen, and prioritize this inward kind of enlightened faith. So Spenser's Faerie Queene is deeply invested in this anxiety, as I think many of the fiction and dramas are at this time. Just as Red Cross Knight abandoned Una, Leontes falsely accuses and wrongfully imprisons Hermione. A little bit of a parallel there, different situations. But both narratives dramatize the difficulty of perception in a world where truth is not self-evident, at least not to Leontes. His own passion has overcome his reason, which is the interpretive faculty that allows one to discern between false and true appearances. So it's a little different here. He's certainly got more of a clouded judgment due to his jealousy. Both texts offer a form of redemption too. Last week we saw how Duessa embodies the fear that beauty and ceremony may mask corruption, just as Protestants in England feared the Catholic Mass, elaborate liturgy as a disguise for idolatry. Red Cross's failure to recognize Duessa's true nature reflects this Protestant concern that Christians might be tricked by false religious authority. So similarly, for Leontes, his fear that Hermione is a deceptive wife echoes, I think, this broader suspicion that everyone in the 16th century has to be feeling in this moment. That what appears to be trustworthy, a queen, a church, a sacred ritual, may in fact be leading one astray. And I think we can rightly call this, in some cases, paranoia. So while Faerie Queene is decidedly Protestant, Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale, it's not very clear to me whether it is. I think it's actually something a little bit more complex than either. We've seen from Erugena to Spenser that Christianity is wielded mostly in service of the enchantment. This play, I think, could pose an exception to that. In the context of Reformation polemics, uh, Christianity has become a weapon of disenchantment. And the Winter's Tale transcends these particular differences by re-enchanting the world with this spiritual vision that's enduring and I think something a little more essential than mere religious affiliation and denominational concern. Now, before we move into the ritual green world, I want to focus on the trial scene because this is where the crisis of interpretation really comes to the fore and leads to the downfall of the court. So, the troubling question, how does one know if their interpretation of an image or of the Bible is true? Because the reformers rejected the Catholic claims to exclusive authority over spiritual truth, and they argued that you can have recourse to Scripture, and that every individual should have access to this so that they might be able to interpret on their own. Whether they were the signs, there was this fear of misreading. Whether it was sacraments, signs, scripture, or even the state of one's soul, it was a major anxiety for Protestant thought. And we can actually see this, I think, in Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, which I didn't put on the syllabus, but it easily could have been placed uh, among all the other things we're reading. So, the servants do return from the oracle. There's the trial scene of Hermione. She has the beautiful, heartbreaking um, speech in which she exonerates herself. She says, well, I leave it up to the gods. The servants return from the oracle. And here they come. The officer says to them, you here shall swear upon this sword of justice that you, Cleomenes and Dion, have been both at Delphos, and from thence have brought this sealed up oracle by the hand delivered of great Apollo's priest, and that since then you have not dared to break the holy seal, nor read the secrets in't. Now, it's implied, of course, that they would never do this, but it's got to be placed on stage. We have to hear this. Cleomenes and Dion say, all this we swear. Leontes says, break up the seals and read. And here's the very laconic statement. Hermione is chaste, Polixenes blameless, Camillo a true subject, Leontes a jealous tyrant. His innocent babe truly begotten, and the king shall live without an heir, if that which is lost be not found. Leontes says, hast thou read truth? As though there's any doubt. Ay, my lord, even so. All it is, here, set down. There is no truth at all in the oracle. The session shall proceed. This is mere falsehood. Is there any better mark of a tyrant than obstinately refusing to accept the sanctioned results? The oracle here is dismissed as fake news and leads to the immediate downfall of his court. Mamillius falls dead, Hermione faints and also ostensibly dies. We believe that she's dead, along with Mamillius. She's taken away by Paulina. Leontes repents, but it's too late. He actually does repent. I think this is quite remarkable, actually. But it is too late. Now, you're picking up on this theme of discernment. How do we know what's true? And this is something that's really, I think, relevant to our day. And the whole visionary idea of poetics, that what we're seeing, what is true. Leontes, like Red Cross Knight, is plagued by this overwhelming sense of doubt. And in Shakespeare, Leontes' jealousy erupts suddenly and irrationally as he interprets innocent gestures between Hermione and Polixenes as just proof of adultery. His perception is poisoned by this internal anxiety rather than this external deception, such as Archimago and his deception. But we are no longer in the world of court from here on out. We return there in the final act, but it's a different world we return to. We're going to move to the third act of this play, where things just shift so dramatically. The allegorical figure of time, this is actually kind of funny to me when this happens. Time arrives on stage to announce the passing of 16 years between the third and fourth acts. We are no longer in the world of court, but in what I'm going to call the green world, or what Northrop Frye calls the green world, and I'll show that in a few moments. Florizel, Polixenes' runaway son, and Perdita, who is Leontes' abandoned daughter, have found each other and intend to marry at the sheep shearing festival. And here is how it begins. Act 4. These your unusual weeds to each part of you do give a life. No shepherdess, but Flora, peering in April's front. This your sheep shearing is a meeting of the petty gods, and you the queen on't. Then Perdita says, Sir, my gracious lord, to chide at your extremes it not becomes me. O pardon that I name them. Your high self, that gracious mark of the land, you have obscured with a swain's wearing, and me, poor lowly maid, most goddess-like pranked up. But that our feasts is in every mess have folly, and the feeders digest it with a custom, I should blush to see you so attired. Swoon, I think, to show myself in a glass. What we see with Florizel, whose name is associated with flowers and the harvest, is a performance of the exact opposite of what we saw in the world of court. He elevates Perdita to the queen of the life-giving festival. Each part of the weeds, her dress, her flowers, do give a life. The goddess Flora, he calls her. He does so in a manner of generosity without knowing that her status is actually royal, and she doesn't know it either at this point. And that he reverses the degradation of her mother Hermione by her father Leontes. And that's what Florizel is doing in this moment. So already we're bending, as soon as we're in the pastoral world, to this world of redemption. Perdita, girl's name, it's Latin. It could mean ruin or decay. It's related etymologically with perdition, as somebody, I think Gina, mentioned in our discussion. But it also means lost. And it harkens back to the oracle's words. The king shall live without an heir if that which is lost be not found. Perdita, her name does mean lost. Okay, but so in contrast to the world of court, this is so refreshing when we come to this act. The fourth act is just like a breath of fresh air. This pastoral scene, this place, is representative of totality, and stated and secured by the passing of the seasons, which are signified by the merry-making festivals. Very English, too. And these festivals were associated with the liturgical year. So the liturgical year was like the Christian calendar in England. You had Christmas at the end of the year, you had Midsummer's Eve, you had Crispin's Day in October, you had Whitsun, or the Feast of Pentecost in June, or late May. It's all associated with the seasons, this Christian year, and that's the liturgical year. The pastoral scene at the shepherd's cottage in the fourth act and the resolution in the fifth stand in stark contrast to the psychological intensity of the first three acts within the court, in which the haptic and interpretive problems and anxieties had arisen and intensified to the point of tragedy. Now, Northrop Frye, writing on the seasonal pastoral worlds within Shakespeare's plays, defines this space as the green world, which charges the comedies with the symbolism of the victory of summer over winter, says Frye. According to Frye, the green world offers a space of rituals and myth that metamorphosizes the characters who enter it. The comic resolution is thus attained as the characters pass from the green world into the world of court in the fifth act, into the normal world. Frye also observes that these rituals and myths betoken a rebirth of, quote, generally a female figure through death and revival or disappearance and withdrawal. So here's the quotation from Frye. Thus, the action of the comedy begins in a world represented as a normal world, moves into the green world, goes into a metamorphosis there in which the comic resolution is achieved, and returns to the normal world. The forest in this play is the embryonic form of the fairy world of A Midsummer Night's Dream, or the Forest of Arden in As You Like It. Did I just, how's my connection, everyone? Good? Okay. I just froze up again. I'll have to edit this once I publish it, but thanks for letting me know. Okay, so the Forest of Arden and As You Like It, the Windsor Forest and the Merry Wives of Windsor, and the pastoral world of the mythical sea-coasted Bohemia in The Winter's Tale. In all these comedies, there is the same rhythmic movement from the normal world to the green world and back again. The green world charges the comedies with a symbolism in which the comic resolution contains a suggestion of the old ritual pattern, the victory of summer over winter. So this green world model is really useful for us, having already encountered the other world idea, the motif we might call it, from Malory and even in Eriugena's philosophy, as being something that could explain what these psychological and otherworldly spaces are. But it's also very much near to the history of England. Because historically, festival celebration, which is what this moment is, a sheep shearing festival, usually combined seasonal revelries with sheep shearings, with feast days, such as Whitsun, Corpus Christi, and Crispin. Regarding these celebrations, they usually culminated in outdoor festivities leading up to the church. And there is the sacrament of the Eucharist, which is the communion of the bread and wine. That was usually participated. That was like the culminating event for many of these celebrations, which is why, it's one of the reasons why, the festivals were removed by Protestant Britain. So regarding sacramentality in medieval England, Matthew Milner, in his book The Sense and the Reformation, published by Routledge in 2016, writes that touch was the fulcrum of traditional sacramentality. So already there's this idea of sacrament being a sign or association with some truth. In the medieval world, it was an actual encounter with the thing it signified. There was no difference between sign and signifier. When you were eating the bread and wine, you believed you were actually eating the body, the flesh and blood of Christ. It tasted like bread and wine, but it actually was different. And this is still the doctrine of transubstantiation in the Roman Catholic rite. Through the haptic encounter, Milner writes, Christians were made and passed through the stages of life. Christ was signified and made present among the celebrants by relics, quote, sacramentals, and by crosses they signified themselves with, end quote. So because of the close association of these festivals, these green world merrymaking festivals, After the Reformation, these festivals were discouraged. Parish merrymaking was on the decline since the Reformation, and it showed a continued decline during Elizabeth's reign. However, during Queen Elizabeth's last years, there was a revival of interest in the liturgical year from among the local peoples, especially in places where the association of feast days and the liturgical calendar was particularly discouraged by Protestants. Now, this has a pagan element to it as well, because the feast days were often laid upon old Celtic and pagan holidays, usually associated with the wheel of the year. In this way, we can actually see the pastoral green world of The Winter's Tale as a reenactment of the medieval liturgical and pagan celebrations with all of its sacramental and seasonal connotations. In fact, the shepherd's cottage with its exchange of flowers, that beautiful scene where Perdita is handing out the flowers, music, dances, the buying of trinkets, it's full of haptic encounters. Sheep shearing festivals were typically celebrated in autumn and often on the days of October saints, such as Saint Crispin. However, the sheep shearing festival here is in summer. Some of them were even associated with Whit Sundays, which makes an appearance in this play. Perdita explicitly associates Florizel with the spring when she says, to Florizel, "Now, my fairest friend, I would I had some flowers of the spring that might become your time of day, and yours, that wear upon your virgin branches yet your maiden heads growing. O Proserpina, from the flowers now that frighted thou lett'st fall from Dis' wagon, daffodils that come before the swallow dares, and take the winds of March with beauty, violets dim, but sweeter than the lids of Juno's eyes, or Cytherea's breath, pale primroses that die unmarried ere they can behold bright Phoebus in his strength, a malady most incident to maids, bold oxlips, and the crown imperial, lilies of all kinds, and the flower de luce being one. Oh, these I lack, to make you garlands of, and my sweet friend to strew him o'er and o'er." And there's this funny moment where Florizel quips back, "What, like a corse? That's like a corpse? No, like a bank for love to lie and play on, not like a corse. Or if, not to be buried, but quick, and in mine arms. Come, take your flowers, methinks I play as I have seen them do in Whitsun pastorals. Sure this robe of mine does change my disposition." How quickly the metaphors work upon the mind when reading this passage. And this just quick dialogue between the two. Florizel teasingly suggests that Perdita's lavish strewing would be more fitting for a corpse. The image of a still, motionless corpse in need of fragrance threatens to sour the beautiful imagery of Perdita's previous lines. But she takes up the image in her reply and transforms the image of the corpse, and implicitly the grave, into a bank for love to lie and play on. As she says, no, not like a corpse, she rejects it, and then she goes back, or if, not to be buried in the earth, but quick or living in my arms. The metaphor of the corpse is rejected and then entertained, drawing its contrast from the still thing to the quick or living thing, from strewn flowers to a living embrace. And Perdita's play with this metaphor performs the same surprising turn from the wintry realm of Leontes' court to the summer green world of the pastoral landscape here. And that same pivot is going to be made in the final act when the still death-like image of Hermione is quickened into a living thing that steps down for an embrace. But there's something else really significant historically here. And that, as I've alluded to, is this mention of Whitsun. Perdita associates or she at least mentions Whitsun from the liturgical calendar with the sheep shearing festival. And I think this explicit mention is significant because Whitsun, or White Sunday as it was called, was the liturgical celebration of the Feast of Pentecost, and it was one of the most lavish celebrations in medieval England. It occurs around the end of spring. The participants would have processed in robes of white into the churches, garnished with flowers, and then there would have been a service. But the Whitsun celebrations had been discouraged in the 16th century when the Protestant government expressed dislike of the Whitsun processions. Why? Not only because it ended in the culmination of the Eucharist, but because it was the only festival to incorporate a statue. The people processing would hold up a statue of the Virgin Mary and bring her into the church. So all of this is within the memory of Shakespeare's contemporaries. I mean, when Hamlet is on stage speaking to his dead father from what is very clearly purgatory, everyone in the audience has a grandfather who died a Catholic, pretty much, at that point. It's so near where this major shift from medieval Roman Catholicism to this early modern Renaissance Protestantism was such a such a break. It's hard for us to really imagine it. But they would have still remembered this. They would have had that association in their mind. The procession leads up to the altar of the church. That's not happening here in Shakespeare, but I'm pretty sure it's happening within the memories of the people there listening. Notably, the sacrament of the Eucharist, that was eating of the bread and wine, was the culminating feature of the event. And it was there where the priest, exercised his priestly powers to turn the bread into the body of Christ and the wine into the blood. The technical term for this theologically is transubstantiation. The substance is made something more than substance, transubstantiation into the actual presence of basically God. So what you were having is a haptic encounter with God. So this is all informing kind of the magic that's going on here, the pagan, the medieval worlds of that the play relies on. So when the Protestant Reformation happened, they turned the real presence of Christ in the body and blood from the bread and wine. They made it a sign instead of the thing signified. They actually separated it. So the Mass, what used to be considered a representation of Christ, was now something more of a symbol, kind of an allegory. The rejection of this doctrine of transubstantiation had both theological and political implications. And it may seem silly to us, but the theological divide became a point of intense religious conflict, with secret Catholics continuing to hold secret masses during this time. So under the previous queen, Queen Mary I, Protestants who denied transubstantiation were executed. Under Elizabeth I, her successor, the Protestant settlement firmly rejected this Catholic doctrine. So there were laws against partaking of this meal, just as there were laws against the liturgical celebrations. So for the English Protestants, communion became memorial, the signified became sign, actual presence became mere commemoration, encounter became memorial. And the fifth act, really interestingly, reverses all of this. Before Paulina leads the king to her statue of Hermione, Leontes heralds her as good Paulina, who has the memory of Hermione. Once the memorial of Hermione is revealed, Leontes laments the inadequacy of this memory by longing for that haptic encounter. He wants to, quote, take treasure from her lips. The restoration of the image, in reality, occurs only after the symbolic communion is re-established through this rebalancing of power, in which Paulina's mediatory authority is granted. So Paulina is the one pulling the strings here. She's the figure with the power. At first sight of Hermione's exposition, her revelation, Leontes is afflicted with a sense of reality of the image. Perdita, too, apparently conscious of the Reformation prohibitions against the veneration of images, pleads, and give me leave, let me, allow me, and do not say 'tis superstition that I kneel and implore her blessings. And she kneels before the image. Now, this is all happening on a very Protestant stage. She too longs for tangibility. Give me that hand of yours to kiss. But Paulina is constantly having to push them back, say, no, don't touch. The statue is newly fixed, the color's not dry. Leontes is moved by the reality of the image as the stone becomes almost corporeal to her, as her veins seem to verily bear blood, he says. In line 64, Leontes begins to believe in another kind of madness, perhaps, that she really is present. This affliction, as he calls it, has a taste as sweet as any cordial comfort. This affliction, this longing that this memorial has produced, tastes as sweet as any cordial comfort. I find that interesting. Cordial, it goes to the Latin root cordis, the heart. So it also has to do with blood. So you're getting these images that are coming into this scene, which looks like some kind of religious scene going on the stage at this moment. He's moved to kiss the statue. Let no man mock me, he says, for I will kiss her. And Leontes cries, good my lord, forbear. Please don't. The haptic encounter that he longs for must be granted by the mediation of her, of Paulina, until the memorial of Hermione is confirmed as actual presence. As Paulina declares, it is required of you that you do awake your faith, recalling both Leontes, and she disclaims, or those who think it is unlawful business I am about, let them depart. And by the way, this recalls Leontes' insult to Paulina back in Act 2, Scene 3. She calls him a mankind witch, or he calls her a mankind witch, which is unlawful. She says, if any of you think this is unlawful, then go. Leontes says, no, proceed, no one's going to go. So he's handing the power kind of to her, allowing this to happen, and potentially the Protestant injunction against the superstition of images, which was so closely associated with magic. So the climactic moment in the Catholic Mass, this sacramental consecration of blood, of the bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ, was often repeatedly associated with magic. The reformers are saying this is hocus pocus. The word hocus pocus is a syncopation of the Latin term hoc est corpus meum. This is my body, which is what the priest would have to say in order to make the elements become his body. So it's quoting from the end of the gospel where God says, or where Christ says, take and eat, this is my body. But they believe that that's actually happening, that speaking over it transforms it. So there's association with magic here. They're kind of obsessed with it in many of the tracks. So in this final act, Shakespeare dips into the reformed grab bag of anti-Catholic rhetoric to bring about the comedic resolution. Paulina insists, again, start not, her action shall be holy as you hear, my spell is lawful. And the characters themselves who are moved to venerate a statue and who so long for commemoration to become presence seem to be anxiously conscious of the Protestant stage on which they stand. Either forbear or resolve you for more amazement, she says. I will make her move. Do not say I'm assisted by wicked powers. Leontes say, make her do what you want. Um, if it's easy for you to make her move, do it. And he says, and what you can make her do, I am content to look on. It is required to awake your faith. No foot shall stir. She insists that the spell, she insists not that the spell is real or that it's false or trickery, not that it's magic, but that it is lawful. And that's what Leontes grants. The moment of Hermione's consecration, if we can call it that, is somewhat tempered by Paulina's previous imperative that the audience do awake their faith. The moment there of Hermione's transformation from object to presence is contingent upon their faith and reflects possibly the Reformed theology of receptionism, which says that, well, Christ is in the bread and wine spiritually if you believe. However, this transformation on the stage goes dangerously beyond the rules of Protestantism and back towards medieval transubstantiation. Hermione is suddenly actually corporeally present. Paulina's plea that they do not shun her lest they see her die again and you kill her double harkens back to the Christian idea, St. Paul's idea that receiving the sacrament unworthily makes you guilty of the body and blood of God. So by Paulina's command, the image of Hermione is restored to this haptic reality by reversing the distinction between sign and reality. And like in Leontes' very brief exclamation that follows, if this be a magic, let it be an art as lawful as eating, would be strange enough if indeed there had not been laws against certain kinds of eating under certain liturgical contexts. So the comic resolution occurs when the Protestant distinction between memorial and presence is reversed. And if we bring the pastoral world of the fourth act in, with all of its pagan and ritual and seasonal imagery, with Hermione's, we can call it resurrection, transubstantiation, in the fifth act, you bring all that into context with England's pre-Reformation liturgical celebrations, we find that the world of court is healed and restored through a reversal of the Reformation's rules concerning sacramental theology and a return to an enchanted medieval performance, engagement with nature. Now, in this lecture, I've drawn these connections not to suggest that this is an allegory. This play is not an allegory. We should not be reading it as an allegory. I don't think Shakespeare means to allegorize a reversal of the Reformation. Neither do I think that Shakespeare is a crypto-Catholic claiming to reinstate transubstantiation here. What I think this play actually achieves for its moment in time is something higher and perhaps even older than the Catholic Protestant Christianities. And what I hope to have done is to give you a sense of how this play would have complicated the feelings, I think, in the experience of the play for those there in the audience, for everyone present. So I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation in discussion and from hearing from our guest lecturer, Dr. Kara McCabe, who's going to talk a little bit about the magic side of things and the context of witchcraft behind this lecture.